I'm planning on butchering this today, but I kind of got to get it out. The idea today was going to be Garrett Wilson, but I kind of changed my mind because this got brought up. I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about like why the underdog ADPs are wide receiver heavy versus running back heavy, and I listened to it and I was like, that's obnoxious. So in underdog, not only is underdog already skewed towards best ball drafts, it's a mandatory 3 wide receiver lineup. And that's why everything has been pushed up towards the wide receivers, especially because the data, the analytics from last year showed that teams that had wide receiver heavy drafts were more successful than running back heavy drafts. But there's a problem with this. And that's like my thoughts on why tiers are deceiving, why the meta, the strategy is wrong, because when we start drafting based off of consensus, then we miss out on the strategy that's actually going to win the current year. The data that we have from last year is always going to be imperfect towards the data that we need to know for this year on how to win. So what we're looking for in fantasy is unicorns. We're looking for guys that are substantially above their peers, because those are guys going to win us our leagues, especially when we factor in value. So a guy like Josh Jacobs last year wins us our league because it takes us like a 5th or 6th round draft capital to go get the guy that finishes running back 2. And it's the same thing. Like Kelsey is great, but if he costs me a 1st or 2nd round draft pick and I can find a guy, that's going undrafted, for instance, and this is just a hypothetical, to go compete with Kelsey, then like I am at an advantage over the guy who actually has a unicorn. So these are the concepts that we're going to think about today. And I have good old Michael Pittman pulled up because he remains one of my targets. He remains one of my targets every week because all the analytics, all the data, all the meta, all the strategy aside, Michael Pittman has the profile to be a league winner. And when we look at Michael Pittman last year, like in a really bad quarterback situation, Michael Pittman still finished above Garrett Wilson, who's my number 1 wide receiver target. Michael Pittman had 141 targets with, was it Sam Elringer? I don't even remember all the quarterbacks that played for the Colts last year, other than Matt Ryan, Sam Elringer, whoever they brought on. Michael Pittman still had 141 targets, 99 receptions, 925 yards. And he missed some time. I had him in one of my leagues. Really bad quarterback play. Now we have a new coaching staff coming in, a new quarterback, and I can't for the life of me figure out why Michael Pittman is going where he's going in drafts. On underdog, Michael Pittman is just I can't even find him right now. Can't be that low, is he? Anyway, I know on ESPN he's going like wide receiver 34, 80 overall, which is absurd because this is a guy that we were talking about last year as potentially being not just a top 10 receiver, but having the profile to be a top 5 guy. And for the most part, because I know a lot of people are talking about Deontay Johnson and his 140 targets, 147 targets last year, and how he's an absurd steal. What we were talking about with Michael Pittman last year is if he can get to 150 targets, that's usually the point where we start talking about those top 5, top 10, those tiered receivers. So this year with Michael Pittman, everything is pointing more and more in the direction of here's a league winner, and he's going so late in your draft. The reason why everything points in the direction is he's already shown that he can get the target volume, even if it was in a prior coaching staff, under prior coaching staff. Anthony Richardson is not going to be a running quarterback. That's not what they drafted him to be. He has the profile to be a running quarterback. He even goes as far, and I don't have Shane Serlin, I think is the name of the head coach for the Colts, but I probably butchered that. He worked with Jalen Hurts, and Jalen Hurts, he is a running quarterback. Don't get me wrong, but they specifically brought these guys in to make him a better pocket passer. So he's not just scrambling around nimbly-bimbly. And that's what I've been saying, that Anthony Richardson's profile looks like he's going to be this year is Jalen Hurts, 3,700 yards, 700 yards rushing, but with more turnovers. That's what Anthony Richardson looks like. Now with the scenario going on with Jonathan Taylor trying to get traded or just being put on the PUP list so he can't play this year. The reality of it is that they're not going to force Anthony Richardson to run more. They're likely going to develop him by forcing him to pass more. So even his flaws as a passer, and there are some, are going to be covered up statistically by the fact that he has to throw the ball to somebody. And you have a guy last year in Michael Pittman who had 141 targets. So the last coaching staff liked him enough to force feed him the football. And I would find it surprising that this coaching staff isn't going to like him enough to force feed him the football either. Now, I also do like Alec Pierce at his price, but Alec Pierce, I think, is more flawed than Michael Pittman is. And even though I can basically get Alec Pierce for free, Michael Pittman is going to cost me 10th, 8th, 9th round pick to go get to potentially get another 140 target season. And if his ADOC actually rises just slightly, well, now I take a guy that was I think he was a top 24 guy last year, and now I have a guy that is pushing towards this rarefied air of a top 10 guy, and he's going outside that list. So my idea about the old meta and unicorns and tiers when we're looking at guys, why it's flawed is because when we look at this year's running back class with the Jonathan Taylor and Josh Jacobs scenarios going on, there are legitimately 7 RB1s. Legitimately. It's Eckler, McCaffrey, Bijan, Barkley, Henry, Pollard, and Chubb. And that's it. There's the line's gone. So it doesn't matter if you're in an 8-man league or a 16-man league, there are 7 RB1s. And if you're touching Josh Jacobs or Jonathan Taylor right now, you're playing with fire. After that, when you hit the Mixon, Etienne, Harris, that tier down, you're again these guys are all capped. Their ceilings are capped. It doesn't matter if they end up having great seasons. Right now, all the data says that these guys are going to be capped for a number of reasons. And if you're buying them to potentially compete with these top 7 guys, the road to get there is murky, and the variables don't exist for you to draw a story or write a story for these guys to compete with these top 7 guys. With maybe the exception of what we're going to talk about next, which is your Ramondre Stevensons, your Dameon Pierce, your Rashad Whites, and Miles Sanders. There's a few other guys that we can talk about, but that's the tier grouping. Why tiers are deceiving is once I miss out on those top 7, and those top 7 should be so ridiculously overvalued, they should begin your draft. Because if I miss on those top 7, they're gone. I've missed the bus. And there's a handful of quarterbacks this year. Right now we're looking at about 4 guys that are those super tiered, Madden code quarterbacks: Mahomes, Allen, Hurts, Jackson. If I miss the bus on those guys, I've missed the bus. Now I'm big on Herbert, but he has to have a statistically anomalous passing year to compete with these running quarterbacks. And I don't like these top tier quarterbacks for other reasons, but if I'm chasing a guy like Herbert versus these guys, I know that the road is much tougher. So going back to why tiers are deceiving, Anthony Richardson profiles already as a guy going outside of these rounds that are going to be able to compete with these guys at a much lesser draft capital. And it's the same thing with when I look at wide receivers, going back to underdog. I have a hard time figuring out my draft strategy this year because there's so many wide receivers that I want to take that have legitimate roads to being top 10 guys. I'm sitting there looking at Michael Pittman, George Pickens, Sky Moore, that are going so late in drafts, or even a Jordan Addison that I think can jump the line and go compete with a T. Higgins right now. So if you're taking T. Higgins at 23 overall for $32, the wide receiver 13, Jordan Addison profiles right now today as a guy that's going to put up a similar season to T. Higgins. So why am I even caring about tier groups when I know that a guy later on the draft profiles to put up the same amount of production, but the value is so much less that if Jordan Addison kills me, why do I care? If I miss on Jordan Addison as 97th overall, why do I care that he didn't put up 1,200 yards receiving? Because I know that there's a chance that he's not going to do that, even though his profile says he's going to a high volume passing offense to be the number 2. So it's little things like that. Like when I look at my tier grouping, I have to understand that, like, how replaceable is the production that I get from my tiers. At wide receiver right now, it is very replaceable. It is very replaceable. Running back, it is not very replaceable. There's a reason why when Zeke signed with the Patriots, I said, thank God, now I can go get Ramondre Stevenson. I didn't think to myself, oh man, this hurts Ramondre Stevenson's value. I said, no, it's going to allow me to get a guy that should profile as a top 10 guy, a bell cow. He still does. It maybe caps his ceiling a little bit, but Ramondre Stevenson should be running back 8, and he's fallen all the way to running back 16 on ESPN and on Underdog. Ramondre Stevenson is probably still high, running back 11, which he's going after Jahmyr Gibbs, which I have no idea how anybody has a pathway for Jahmyr Gibbs to exceed running back 10. He may finish the season as running back 10, no doubt, but for him to go up and jump into quote unquote the tier group of your Saquons and your Bijan, he has zero ability to do that. As long as, well, even if Montgomery stays healthy. So like what we're looking at with these, how tiers are deceiving, is we should be looking at tiers not so much in terms of projected value based off what they did last year. We should be looking at tiers versus what they're projected to do this year, and then weighing the risk of what the consensus says, the ADP, and saying how much more should I value this guy because the consensus has tiered him in a different area of the draft. Like there's a reason why I don't like Devontae Smith and AJ Brown this year. It's not because I don't think they're good players. They cap each other's ceiling. Like I'm buying the wide receiver 10 to be the wide receiver 10. I don't like that. So it doesn't matter what tier group you put AJ Brown in. It's very difficult for him to exceed where he's going. I'm probably going to go out and get Garrett Wilson, knowing that Garrett Wilson this year is going to finish as wide receiver 8 and the 16th most valuable player in fantasy. There's a reason behind that, is because my co-manager and I have just decided that like we're just going to go get Garrett Wilson because that's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. But I can't. I look over at the other side and go, hey, because I have to spend this capital on Garrett Wilson, a guy like Miles Sanders, who is projecting to be a 3-down back for the Carolina Panthers, like the bar for Miles Sanders to go compete with, as I click around, to go compete with what would be those elite guys. So if I take a Saquon Barkley, like the ability for Miles Sanders to jump from what he did last year, which was about 1,200 yards rushing and 11 touchdowns. He had a rather, I don't have it right now, but he had like 78 yards receiving. And the ability for Miles Sanders to jump from the tier group that he's in to be competing with Saquon Barkley is very simple, based off the fact that if he can just get something along the lines of 50 receptions, which he's gotten before in the past, his first year in Philadelphia, and 300 yards receiving, well, now he's competing with a tier group that should be drafted with the top overall picks, because once you miss out on those guys, the next tier is not going to be able to compete. So I have to go find the actual guys in the draft that can go compete with that tier group that is being projected sometimes erroneously to put up certain numbers. So like same thing with like tight end. When I look at tight end, I have to be able to look at tight end like Hawkinson, Kittle, Pitts, Goddard, Freiermuth, Ingram, Njoku, Komet, Schultz, Ertz, Higbee, Kincaid, Chig, Dulcich, all these guys going down the line, they don't have any ability to compete with Travis Kelce. Why would I draft them? Like, what is the point of me throwing that draft pick away, knowing that it's always going to be an imperfect pick when I can go down and find somebody else in a draft? And I'm going to say this like even a Hayden Hurst who projects to potentially lead the Carolina Panthers in targets. Like, it costs me nothing to find out that Hayden Hurst is a bust. It costs me everything to find out that Travis Kelce gets bitten by Father Time. So anyway, to kind of finish off on this idea, going back to Michael Pittman, is what does it cost me to find out that Michael Pittman this year with Anthony Richardson is the number 34 wide receiver? That's where the consensus is. When reality of it is this guy was going as like a third round draft pick, and that fervor about what he could be if he hits 150 targets was pushing him into the late second round. And this year, no one's talking about him because of this potentially bad idea that the Colts are just not going to throw the football. And if Jonathan Taylor holds out, they're going to put the ball into their best athlete or their best football player's hands. That's Anthony Richardson. And he's going to throw it to his best receiver. That's Michael Pittman. So I don't really care how many interceptions Anthony Richardson throws. I just want him to throw every single football to Michael Pittman. And I want Michael Pittman to catch them and compete with a tier group that is like 3 or 4 tiers above him, because people are not looking at the fact that like the tiers that you're looking at are not real things. They're things that we have constructed to kind of objectively categorize these players, when that's the biggest thing about winning your fantasy football is looking at these rankings and seeing how imperfect they are and attacking the guys that are not being valued correctly. So anyway, it's been a little too long today. I think I'll talk more about Garrett Wilson tomorrow and how imperfect this is. But today I just wanted to get this out, this rambly post. So maybe I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.